Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we will review everything you need to know about directed numbers. So let's start by looking at the number line. These arrows mean that it goes forever in both directions. So in the center of the number line is this number 0. To the right of 0 are numbers that are above or greater than 0. We call those positive numbers. We just don't usually write the positive sign. So 1 is the same as positive 1, 2 is the same as positive 2, etc. If you see a number like 4, you can assume it's positive. So 0 is in the middle. It is neither negative nor positive. To the left of 0 are the negative numbers. So these numbers have a direction sign in front of them. That's why we call them directed numbers. This sign here just means below 0. So -6 means 6 below 0. -2 means 2 below 0. So as we go along to the right of the number line, numbers are getting larger. So number to the right is larger. So you know, for example, that 5 is greater than 3. So remember, when deciding which way the symbol goes, think of it as a crocodile's mouth, and the crocodile eats the larger number. This says 5 is greater than 3. So you probably already knew that before we started this topic. But if we go into negative numbers, it's actually the opposite that's true. Let's say I want to compare -3 and -5. So when I say compare, I mean decide which is larger. So note, -3 is to the right of -5. So that means this number is larger. So even though 5 is greater than 3, -3 is greater than -5. So once again, think of the symbol that goes between them as a crocodile's mouth. The crocodile wants to eat the larger number, which in this case is this one. So we have the mouth facing the -3 in this case because it's larger. This says -3 is greater than -5. On the other hand, if you have something like -4 and 2, you know that 4 is greater than 2 because it's to the right. But when negatives become involved, it changes our ordering. 2 is to the right of -4. In other words, if you want to go from -4 to 2, you have to go to the right. You have to make the number larger. This number here, 2, is the larger one, so we put the symbol between them that has the crocodile eating the larger number. So this is a statement. This statement says -4 is less than 2. So when the symbol points to the right, it means greater than, because in the number line, to the right means larger. When the symbol points to the left, it means less than, because going to the left, the numbers are getting smaller. And it's important we keep this in mind when we add and subtract negative numbers. So when we are adding and subtracting directed numbers, we need to use these rules here. The idea is when you add a positive number, you go to the right, and if you subtract a positive number, you go to the left. Okay, what am I talking about? We need to be able to do ones like this. So let's say we have -6 plus 8. So here we start at -6 on the number line. Now we are adding 8, so we are making this number, our original number, larger by 8. So when we do -6 plus 8, we start at -6 and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spots to the right. We end up on 2. So -6 plus 8 is 2. On the other hand, if I had something like -1 subtract 4, so I go to -1. Now subtract 4 means I'm making the number smaller. So I go 4 to the left. I make it smaller by 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I finish here at -5. So -1 subtract 4 is -5. Now it becomes a bit more complicated when you have multiple signs between the numbers. So let's say, for example, I had -7 plus -6. So here I have a plus and a minus sign next to each other. These rules tell us what to do with that. When you have a plus and minus next to each other, replace it with a minus. So it doesn't matter that there's a bracket in between. This just becomes -7 subtract 6. So we start at -7 and go 6 to the left. The number line helps us add and subtract, but we need to be able to do these without a number line. So starting at -7, we're reducing it by 6. We're going 6 to the left. We end up getting -13. If I had something like -20 subtract -9, well, now I have two negatives next to each other. It doesn't matter about the brackets. Two negatives next to each other, we replace with a positive, a plus sign. So this becomes -20 plus 9. So I start at -20 and I'm making the number 9 greater than. A lot of people would say this is -29, but that's not right. My answer has to be 9 more than -20. -29 is less than -20. So -20 plus 9, I'm making it 9 more. I actually get -11. So make sure you know these rules and they appear on your cheat sheet. All right, let's now look at multiplying and dividing directed numbers. So here we have a few rules that probably look familiar. This is exactly what I wrote on the previous slide, but this is the confusing part. These rules mean something slightly different when you're adding or subtracting compared to whether you're multiplying or dividing. See, when we were adding or subtracting, we were referring to these symbols being next to each other. But when we multiply or divide directed numbers, this is telling us about the answer. And I know it is confusing, but let's look at a few examples. So let's say we had -7 times -4. So when you're multiplying or dividing directed numbers, first just multiply the numbers and forget about the signs. So let's just do 7 times 4 is 28. Now, when we're multiplying and dividing, you see minus and a minus equal a plus. What I mean is that the answer is a plus. When you multiply two negatives, the answer is positive. So I'm going to leave this here. 28 is the same as positive 28. That's my final answer. If I have something like -9 times 8, so I go 9 times 8 is 72. My rule is if you multiply a negative by a positive, the answer is negative. So I need to put a negative sign in front of there. And it's exactly the same for division as well. So let's say I had -56 divided by -8. Remember, this fraction line means divide. So 56 divided by 8 is 7. And I use the same rule here. A negative divided negative gives a positive answer. So I'm going to leave my answer as +7. So just note when you're squaring numbers, that means timesing it by itself, you never get a negative answer. So something like -4 squared, this little 2, which means squared, means you times the number by itself. So I times -4 by itself. Well, 4 times 4 is 16, and a negative times a negative gives a positive. So when you square numbers, you get a positive. Just like when you square -11, the answer is not negative. 11 times 11 is 121. And a negative times a negative is a positive. The answer here is +21. Make sure you know when you square a number, the answer is never negative. All right, let's just look at a couple of harder questions now. So let's start by looking at a worded question. Minimum temperature in January, 12 degrees. In July, it's -4 degrees. How much warmer is the temperature in January? So this question is asking by how much does the temperature need to rise to go from -4 to 12? You're figuring out the distance between these two. And distance always means subtract. So we go 12 degrees in January, subtract the -4 in July. That will tell me the distance between these two numbers. In other words, by how much we need to increase this number to get that one. So we know that 12 minus -4 is the same as 12 plus 4. Two negatives next to each other becomes a positive sign. And of course, you would already know that 12 plus 4 is 16. So the temperature is 16 degrees Celsius warmer in January. In other words, you need to take -4 and add 16 to get to 12. All right, this here is a magic square. So a magic square needs to have each of its rows, columns, and 2 diagonals adding to the same number. So to do this, we need to figure out the magic sum. We need to figure out what each of the columns, rows, and diagonals must add to. Fortunately, one of them's already done for us. This diagonal here, -1 plus 0 plus 1 equals 0. So that means each of these and the diagonals must add to 0. So let's look for ones where there is only one number left. So -5 plus 1 is -4. How much do you need to get from -4 to 0? Well, if you wanted to solve this here, you could use your number line. You start at -4 and you just count how much you need to go to get to 0. The answer is, of course, +4. So I'm going to put a +4 there. So remember, they need to add to 0. So 4 plus 0 is 4. I need a -4 there to get back to 0. So -1 plus -4 is -5. Because we're starting at -1, going 4 to the left on the number line. So -5, I need to add 5 to get to 0. And luckily, 5 plus 0 plus -5 is also 0. All right, 5 plus 1 is 6, so I need to put a -6 here to get back to 0. So -6 plus 0 is -6. I need 6 more to get to 0. All right, let's try this question here. A plus B equals 21. A minus B equals 43. Let's find what B minus 2 times A is. So we need first to find what A and B are. So that is not an easy thing to do. You're finding two numbers that add to 21, whose sum is 21, but difference is 43. So since their difference is higher than their sum, clearly one of the numbers, in particular B, is going to have to be negative. So once you see that, you can probably come up with the answer. Note that these two add up to 64. A is going to have to be halfway between those two numbers. Half of 64 is 32. So A is going to have to be 32. So if A is equal to 32, what does that say about B? What do you add to 32 to get to 21? So you might be thinking to yourself, hang on, you can't add anything to 32 to get to 21 because anything you add will make the number bigger. But we know that if you add a negative, it's the same as subtracting. So I want to subtract 11 to go from 32 to 21, but another way of subtracting 11 is adding -11 because the plus and the minus become a minus. So actually B will be -11. 32 plus -11 is 21, but what about this next one here? So we know if we want to go from 32 up to 43, we need to add 11. 32 plus 11 is 43, but here is a minus. How do we add when we're subtracting? Well, remember, subtracting a negative is the same as adding. So I can put a -11 there also, because this will become 32 plus 11, which is 43. So in both equations, we get the right answer if A is 32 and B is -11. 32 plus -11 is 21. 32 minus -11 is 43. So in this equation, B and A, which have to be the same numbers as before, B has to... A is 32. So this will equal -11 minus 2 by 32. Now we know from order of operations that we do this part first, the multiplication. So, leaving the -11 alone, 2 times 32 is 64, -11 minus 64 is minus 75, and we are done. Alright, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.